They say good fences make good neighbors, but what do you do when your neighbor is a petty tyrant with a lifted truck, a fragile ego, and a beer can trail marking his territory? Simple. You wait for winter, and you give his car a frosty little surprise. If you've ever wanted to clap back at a petty, obnoxious neighbor without ever lifting a finger in violence, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe for more juicy Reddit revenge stories, and comment below with the pettiest thing you've ever done to a neighbor. Now let's dive into a slow burn, icy cold dose of poetic justice. Years ago, I landed a dream contract working with a small but prestigious studio on the US West Coast. It was the kind of gig that made the long hours and creative burnout worth it. I relocated and rented a charming 2-bedroom townhouse with my girlfriend, now my wife, and we settled in for what we thought would be a peaceful few months. The house was perfect, cozy, clean, and blessed with something that felt like gold. At the time, a private single-car garage. Nothing fancy, but for someone from the UK, unfamiliar with American winters, the thought of not scraping ice off a windshield every morning was a huge win. Now here's where the story takes a turn, because while the house was great, the neighbor? Not so much. His name was Chad. Of course it was. Mid-30s. Buzz cut. That didn't quite hide his receding hairline. And standing, maybe 5'5", if you were being generous. Now I don't usually judge people by their looks, but Chad insisted on compensating in every other way. He had a monstrous, lifted truck, so tall it looked like it needed a ladder to climb into. The kind of vehicle you buy when you've got more horsepower than personality. And when he wasn't revving that beast at 2 a.m., he was showing off his other pride and joy. A heavily modified Honda Civic, complete with a custom exhaust, that screamed like a banshee on fire. His hobbies? Sitting in his driveway with a rotating crew of 4 equally petty friends, downing beer like water and chucking empty cans onto neighboring lawns, including mine. At first, Chad seemed okay. When we were moving in, he actually offered to move his car to make room for the movers. I remember thinking, wow, maybe this guy just looks intense, but has a good heart. Spoiler alert. He didn't. Right after we finished unloading, Chad gave me a little backstory. Unsolicited, of course. He said the previous tenants used to let him park his car in their garage during the winter because his was full of gym gear and a sweet motorcycle build. He even tried to act casual about it. Yeah man, the code's probably the same. You mind if I just, use it again this winter? Now, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but the way he was already trying to reclaim space, that wasn't his set off a red flag. So I told him, truthfully, that I hadn't even gotten the garage code or key from the landlord yet, and that I couldn't open it myself unless I was already inside. Chad didn't miss a beat. Weird, yeah. Mine doesn't work anymore either. Aha. It wasn't long after that I called my landlord to talk about a few things, and I casually brought up Chad, asking if it was normal for him to have access to the garage. The landlord's response? Do not, under any circumstances, give that guy the code or a key. Apparently, the last tenants were robbed right after Christmas, and the landlord strongly suspected Chad and his beer-guzzling buddies were involved. No evidence, of course, but enough suspicion that he changed every lock and code before I moved in. He even said, I shouldn't say this, but just watch your back with that guy. At that point, the chill wasn't just coming from the upcoming winter. It was coming from my gut. After that call with the landlord, I began to see Chad in a whole new light. At first, I really tried to brush off his quirks. Maybe he was just socially awkward. You know the type, a little too loud, a little too eager, but ultimately harmless. Maybe the whole garage thing was innocent, just a neighbor trying to make the best of a cramped space. I even rationalized it a bit. He probably just wants to protect his car from the snow. I told myself, maybe he's one of those car guys who just needs a little help. I mean, sure, he had a temper. And sure, his constant presence outside, with his little crew, felt like some kind of backyard sitcom, just one cheap laugh track away from a brawl. But I didn't want to assume the worst. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe, just maybe, there was a decent guy underneath the lifted truck and the ego. But it didn't take long before the mask slipped and Chad's true colors started bleeding out. It began subtly. He'd linger in front of our townhouse, pretending to adjust something on his Civic, just as my girlfriend got home from work. The moment she stepped out of her car, Chad would smirk and shout something like, "Evening, sweetheart, need help with those bags?" First, we chalked it up to uncomfortable friendliness. But then, the comments got more suggestive, the looks more lingering. The worst part? He always did it when I wasn't around. It took my girlfriend recording one of his sleazy remarks on her phone for me to believe just how bold Chad was getting. I confronted him, calmly but firmly, and told him to stop harassing my partner. His response? He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Don't be so uptight. It's just compliments. You Brits can't take a joke, huh?" Something about the way he said Brits made my skin crawl, like I was just some foreign annoyance, a tourist he could outlast. From that day forward, Chad dropped all pretense of being friendly. He parked his massive truck just far enough across my driveway that I couldn't pull in or out easily. I'd have to do a 6-point turn just to get around it, creeping forward, inch by inch, reversing, adjusting, swearing under my breath, all while Chad and his beer-guzzling pit crew sat nearby pretending not to watch, but you could feel their eyes. Every awkward turn of the wheel felt like a small humiliation they quietly celebrated. Sometimes, he'd stand outside with his little posse of driveway goblins, blasting awful early 2000s rock music at full volume, laughing obnoxiously any time I came outside. One day, I found 24 empty beer cans, neatly lined up on my lawn, like a tribute or a message. I knew it was him. Of course it was. And then came the winter. This is where everything changed. You see, in our area, once winter hits hard, street parking gets banned due to snow plowing. That meant Chad, who couldn't use his own garage, thanks to all the junk he stored in there, and who had been denied access to the visitor lot due to previous complaints, was suddenly out of options. He had to park in his own driveway whether he liked it or not. And trust me, he did not. Chad hated the cold. He'd complain loudly every morning as he scraped thick ice from his Civic. He'd rev the engine angrily, as though that would somehow melt the frost faster. One time, I saw him punch the side mirror in frustration. Every day, his rage grew. Then one night, things escalated again. A group of teenagers we never found out who slashed the cover on his Civic and keyed the paint. It looked bad. The entire passenger side looked like it had been clawed by a bear. Guess who Chad blamed? "If you had just let me use your garage," he growled, cornering me near my mailbox. None of this would have happened. I looked him in the eye and said nothing because I didn't need to. At that point, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was studying him. Every tantrum, every curse, every empty can thrown my way, I was quietly storing up his behavior, like logs, in a fireplace, because I knew, deep down, winter wasn't just going to hurt Chad. It was going to break him. It wasn't quite Christmas yet, but everything already felt merry and bright. That night, the one with the shredded Christmas lights and gutted inflatable snowman, lying limp on my lawn, like a deflated insult, I stood in my kitchen gripping a steaming mug of coffee, like it was the only thing keeping me from walking next door and doing something truly regrettable. Rage buzzed beneath my skin. My hands trembled. I kept replaying the image of those decorations, torn, slashed, and dumped like trash over and over. I hadn't even bought them to impress anyone. I'd bought them because my wife loved them. They made her smile, and that was what really got under my skin. Chad didn't just disrespect me. He went after the joy in our home. That's when something inside me shifted. You know, that moment when frustration turns to focus. When you stop reacting emotionally and start planning? I took a long sip of that coffee, walked into my garage, and stared at the garden hose coiled in the corner like a sleeping serpent. Winter had arrived in full force. The forecast? 2 weeks of sub-zero temperatures, snow flurries, and bone-shattering wind chills, and Chad, genius that he was, had nowhere safe to park his precious modified Civic, the same Civic that he revved like a chainsaw outside my bedroom window, the one he parked so close to my front steps, I could barely get the groceries in. Suddenly, I had a vision. No yelling, no confrontation, no illegal vandalism. Just nature. Just physics. Just a little nudge from me, and the elements would do the rest. I stood there, smiling to myself, the plan already taking shape. The next night, I waited. I watched. As soon as Chad's Civic was parked, perfectly in his driveway, exposed to the elements, I slipped out under the cover of darkness. It was 10 p.m. Snow was beginning to fall, soft, but steady. I opened the garage silently, pulled out the hose, and crept around the side of the house. From the shadows, I let the water spray, not violently, not forcefully, just enough to give the car a gentle misting. The windows fogged up immediately. The cold began to bite. I gave it a good once-over, front to back, like I was detailing it in reverse. Then I coiled the hose back up, snuck it into the garage and went to bed. 30 minutes later, I did it again, then again, and again. From 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., every half hour, I repeated the process. Each layer of water froze solid. The Civic turned from tuner car to frosted sculpture. By dawn, it was like a popsicle with wheels, completely locked in place, frozen to the driveway by a sheath of solid, glimmering ice. Chad came out sometime around 7:30 a.m. I watched from a cracked window, sipping my coffee, as he stepped outside in a hoodie, flip-flops, and gym shorts, like it wasn't 5 degrees Fahrenheit. At first, he didn't notice. Then he reached for the door handle. He yanked. Nothing. He pulled harder. The door didn't even wiggle. Then he noticed the sheen, the thick ice covering the entire car like nature had gift-wrapped it for me. That's when the screaming started. He let out a howl, some primal, guttural sound that must have woken the dead. He stomped. He threw his vape pen across the lawn. He kicked the Civic's rear tire and slipped, landing straight on his ass. I nearly choked on my coffee. A few minutes later, his buddies showed up, the same lawn chair beer brigade from the summer. They circled the car, like cavemen around a new form of fire, poking it, chipping at the ice, running their hands along the hood. Like maybe, just maybe, this was salvageable. One of them brought out a hairdryer. Another had a heat gun. Someone tried a kettle. Then came the tools, hammers, crowbars, and I kid you not, a sawzall. At one point, they were trying to cut the ice off the Civic, like it was a shrink wrap. The thing is, when you spray a car every 30 minutes in freezing temps, the water gets into the cracks, the doors, the wheels, the undercarriage. That Civic wasn't just under ice. It was one with the driveway, fully fused, like an ancient mammoth frozen in permafrost. At one point, I heard the unmistakable pop of something cracking, possibly the windshield, possibly the man's sanity. A neighbor came out, then another, then two more. By 9 a.m. we had a full-blown audience, people peeking out from behind curtains, standing on porches, whispering to one another like they were watching the climax of a soap opera. And all of it, every second of it, was petty justice in its purest, most elegant form. The police showed up around 10 o'clock. Someone must have called them. Maybe Chad. Maybe a nosy neighbor, hoping to see him finally get arrested for disturbing the peace. The officer took one look at the situation. This fully encased Civic, surrounded by half-drunk mechanics and confused neighbors, and just sighed. He asked if there'd been foul play. Chad ranted. The officer asked if he saw anyone sabotage the car. Of course, he didn't. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, nothing illegal. Just an unusual case of extreme winter. The cop left. The fire department showed up later, mostly to make sure no one was trying to use open flames or melting equipment near the gas tank. They took one look, chuckled, and drove off. Chad was left alone, flailing in his own frosty karma. By the second day, Chad had moved from anger to desperation. His buddies stopped showing up, whether they had jobs to get to, or just couldn't deal with the shame of failure anymore. Couldn't say. But one thing was clear: Chad was on his own. And the Civic? Still frozen solid. Still immovable. Still a block of ice. With custom rims. Now here's the thing about winter in our town. Once the cold really sets in, there's no thawing for a while. No sun to help you out. No warm afternoon to naturally loosen the grip of Mother Nature. For almost a full week, I watched as Chad tried every trick in the book. He started using de-icer, gallons of it. He tried salt, kitty litter, even a blowtorch once, which, by the way, scorched the paint right off the side panel. Eventually, it looked like he gave up on salvaging it entirely and shifted into a mindset of brute force extraction. He wrapped a chain around the undercarriage and tried pulling it out with his massive truck, the one too big to fit in his own garage. But all that did was spin his wheels and nearly rip the Civic's bumper clean off. One afternoon, I came home to find him in the driveway, shirtless despite the cold, red in the face, wielding a shovel like it was a weapon of vengeance. He was hacking at the ice in a full-blown tantrum. And that's when it happened, the moment that made this entire petty saga so incredibly worth it. I stepped onto my porch with a thermos of cocoa in one hand and a camera in the other, not to record, but to fake the threat of recording. I didn't even press record. I just held it steady, facing him. He noticed. He froze, panting, sweat steaming from his shoulders. "What the hell are you looking at?" he barked. I gave him the most British, painfully polite smirk I could muster. "Oh, nothing," I said. "Just enjoying the winter wonderland." "You doing a bit of ice sculpting, are you?" His face turned even redder. He dropped the shovel, stormed inside, and slammed the door. From that moment forward, Chad didn't say another word to me. No more attempts to intimidate. No more catcalling my wife. No more beer cans on my lawn. Just cold silence, which, honestly, was the greatest gift I could have asked for. But the real ending? Oh, that came a few months later. Spring finally rolled around. The snow began to melt. The last patch of ice in Chad's driveway disappeared, revealing deep gouges in the concrete where his friends had used that sawzall. And the Civic? It was never the same. The paint was ruined. One door never opened again. The windshield had 2 spiderweb cracks. And every time he drove it, it rattled like an old shopping cart. Shortly after that, my work contract came to an end. We packed up, said our goodbyes, and moved to a different city. Somewhere quieter, cleaner, and most importantly, Chad-free. But the story didn't end there. A year or 2 later, I got a message from my old landlord. We still chatted occasionally. He was always curious if I'd had any further run-ins with the infamous next-door neighbor. He sent me a news article. Local men arrested in string of convenience store burglaries. There they were. Mugshots lined up like the world's worst boy band. Chad and 3 of his buddies. Turns out the landlord had been right all along. They were trouble. They had robbed the last tenants. And now, they were finally caught red-handed. After getting sloppy during a holiday theft spree. Reading that article gave me a kind of closure I didn't even know I needed. It's one thing to free someone's car out of petty revenge. It's another thing entirely to know that justice, real, lawful justice, eventually caught up with them too. There's something beautifully poetic about karma. How it doesn't always come when you want it, but when it does, it lands like a hammer wrapped in snow and silence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's not violent. It's not even obvious. It's petty. It's patient. And it leaves your enemy frozen in place, literally and metaphorically, while you walk away with peace, cocoa, and a damn good story. If you've ever experienced the sweet, icy satisfaction of petty revenge, smash that like button and subscribe for more real stories where justice isn't just served. It's crafted. What's the most satisfying petty revenge you've ever seen? Drop it in the comments and let's celebrate. The art of calm, calculated justice. One frozen Civic at a time.